Welcome to the Behavior Speak podcast. Now, here's your host, Ben Ryman.
Okay. I I had to do some of that. I was like, wait, let me make sure everything looks okay behind me. It's nice to have the blur feature sometimes because then you can't see anything. But then sometimes it doesn't feel real either. So crooked pictures. All right. Yep.
Welcome to another episode of the Behaviour Speak podcast. I'm your host, Ben Ryman. Today on the show, we've got Shreeya Deshmukh.
Nice job. Yes.
Perfect. Shreya's a Ph.D. candidate at the University of South Florida, and folks who listen to the episode will be familiar with that university from a recent episode from a shameless plug of Dr. Kim Crosland that was recently on. And after kind of going back to the website and taking a look at sort of who else works at USF, I found some other cool people, and Shreeya was one of them. And after some more digging, I found that Shreeya works at well, I'll let her tell us more about it in a second here. But essentially, folks will remember we had Wes Lowry on, episode 19 maybe, I'm not sure. He works for Team ABA, and Team ABA does behavior, basically applies behavior science to coaching in mostly like sports, but I think there's some personal training, some nutrition, but I think they have like some cool basketball leagues and volleyball and some other neat things that they were doing, and I thought that was really, really sharp. And then I just happened upon another agency called, and I think ABA Sports Innovation. Is that right? That was it called?
That's right.
And discovered that Shreeya was also there, and that they do some other cool things. But I'm not gonna ruin it all. I'm gonna let her tell us the story. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
So before we kind of get into all this cool stuff, and the focus in particular, and folks will hopefully see that in the title when we come up with one, will be around dance, and this is essentially using ABA in dance instruction, and a lot of really neat things came out of the chat you and I had last week about that. I'm not a dancer by any means, so it's interesting to sort of learn about both the application of ABA and something different, but also the something different. So I'm looking forward to learning a bit more about dance today as well. So I think that's going to be fun. But before we got to get into that, maybe you can just tell folks sort of your origin story, kind of how you got into the field of ABA. And then eventually, what led you to be doing work in the areas of dance and other sports?
Yes, absolutely. So I started off with ABA when I was pursuing my bachelor's at the University of Florida in Gainesville. And I got to work with some incredible professors and graduate students there and got started in the clinical world of ABA, working with individuals with autism. And when I graduated, I wanted to explore some other applications of ABA, and I came across health, sports, and fitness. And I saw that Dr. Miltenberger was at USF, the University of South Florida in Tampa, Florida. And I was so interested to meet him and to learn about his research. And I found that there is a way for me to connect my experience with dance with ABA. And so my background as a dancer, I've been a dancer since I was a young girl, and I initially trained in Indian classical styles of dance and then explored other styles of dance as well. So dance has always been my passion. And then I had my interest in ABA, and I came to USF, and I found that there was a way to put those two together. And I was so happy to get started here at USF. And from that experience of combining dance and ABA, I also got to know Dr. Mallory Quinn, who's also based here in Tampa, who does the clinical work, combining dance and ABA in the clinical world. So that was very exciting. So I work both sides, research and clinical, and I love what I do.
That's awesome. So, a couple things. So, you mentioned Dr. Miltenberger. Dr. Miltenberger is not someone I would normally associate with dance instruction. I think of Miltenberger, I think of safety skills. I think of guns in the home, firearms. I think of the really cool, and I don't know, he must be a master at sort of writing to ethics boards, because he can do these really cool sort of in situ studies of things that are super sketchy, like child abuse and guns and sort of those sorts of things. And I cannot imagine what it'd be like to write a sort of ethics proposal on we're going to have firearms in the home. We're going to see if through our intervention if the kids grab them or not, that sort of thing. Or we're going to, or I remember he presented at ABAI. When was that? I think it was like 2010 or 11, and he was talking about one of the sort of training folks with disabilities to report abuse or something to that effect. And he actually had Confederates coming in, and they would do things like ask the subject to remove their shirt or those sorts of things, that might happen in sort of an abuse situation, which, I mean, amazing, because in the sense that he's able to, really test in these really dangerous situations if those interventions are successful. But the other side of the coin, really, probably tough to get through. So anyway, point being, what's Dr. Miltenberger got to do with dance?
Yeah, so he, as you explained, has explored so many different applications of ABA, and one of those is health, sports, and fitness, and I think specifically the sports and fitness side of things. So he has worked with many master's students and some doctorate students as well, who are interested in applying ABA to their specific sport that they're passionate about. And so yeah, he actually does have quite a bit of research on improving sports performance, and then also has some research on increasing physical activity as well. So, yeah, surprising. He does have that line of research as well. He does a lot of different things.
You're right. I do remember some of the stuff on increasing physical activity now that you mention it. So, yeah, that's fair. Dancing. You say you've been dancing since you were a young child, and kind of beginning with sort of classical Indian dance, which is so cool. We're very fortunate in the part of the world that we live in, not where I am right now, in sort of a remote sort of Western British Columbia, but spent a lot of years in sort of the Vancouver kind of Surrey, BC area, which a lot of folks will may be familiar with, has a massive South Asian population. In fact, I think I heard at one point that there's sort of, in sort of greater Vancouver, you have a massive South Asian population, a massive sort of Asian, predominantly Chinese population, and then the minority is the white population, kind of in that part of the world. And so, really, definitely a melting pot of culture. But I just remember when my wife and I lived in Surrey and going down to sort of the Diwali and Vaisakhi different festivals and just watching all the cool dance. I worked in a group home where I managed a group home where I think I had 6 or 7 South Asian staff and one woman in particular, Cherry was her name. And Cherry used to, every now and then, Cherry would show up in my office with a box about yay big, this fat, full of homemade samosas, and say, "Here you go, Ben, take them home." Like, whoa, this is awesome. And and of course, and lots of traditional dress and at our staff parties and dancing and it's just amazing to watch. Classical Indian dance and some of the stuff that kind of happens there, and the music is just awesome. So I can see why you're into it. Is that one of the areas that you teach in?
Not currently. So since then, I've kind of moved away from some Indian styles, and then I help out with maybe some of the dance classes, but maybe the yoga classes or the fitness classes. I'm a certified kids yoga teacher and then also a certified personal trainer. So it allows me to work with individuals with disabilities and then providing them ABA therapy within those contexts. So I've been able to work at Mallory's studio and sort of incorporate my ABA therapy into these other areas of interest of mine. But eventually I do hope to go back to the Indian classical dancing, so that's still there.
So what makes one a certified kids yoga teacher?
Well, there is a training. It's an online or in-person training. I think it's fairly well known in Tampa and in the yoga community, but it's literally, it's called Kidding Around Yoga. And so that's one of the really fun, and it was a great program to take. So that's how I got certified as a kids yoga teacher. And so they teach you how to incorporate yoga, but like kind of making it more applicable for children who maybe can't sit for that long and meditate, but how do you still teach them those aspects of yoga? So it was a very cool training.
And so what's the age range there that you're teaching?
Yeah, well, I started with baby yoga, so I was really teaching some of my kids weren't even 1 yet, so they were really little, and they would come with their parents, and we would do yoga with them, and it was really fun. The parents were helping assist them through the different yoga poses, but man, I mean, they could just like whip out a downward dog, like, oh my goodness, I was so impressed. I was surprised. Mallory had told me that, oh, it's such a fun class to teach. You should definitely teach it for your first time. And I had so much fun with it. It was crazy.
I'm trying to imagine what that would be like to sort of take an infant and kind of, bend them.
Yeah.
Like are the parents kind of holding them in downward dog sort of thing? Because obviously these are kids that aren't even walking yet, let alone crawling. And so
yes, definitely.
Maybe they could do cat and cow, I guess, maybe if they got to the crawling piece there. But
right. And then some of the kids we would have semester after semester. So as they themselves are growing up, I can see that the parents are not having to assist as much. And then, another semester later, the kids are doing the downward dog independently. So it was really cool to see just the kids over so many years. And then, so it goes from baby yoga all the way up to like teen yoga. And then of course, adult yoga, but that's a whole nother certification and things like that.
Right on. And what about sort of this place that you're working in? So Dr. Quinn, I think, is she like the owner or kind of runs the company? What is the company called and what do you folks do there?
Yes, it's called ABA Sports Innovations. Originally started with training competitive dancers using different behavioral interventions and procedures, but really has just flourished into so much more than that now. Mallory has done such a wonderful job exploring new areas of application for health, sports, and fitness. So what originally started off just in dance, she was able to work with kids with special needs, able to apply ABA therapy within that. And then we also get into like the supervision and training aspect where we train different athletic coaches or personal trainers or BCBAs, BCABAs in how to apply ABA in health, sports, and fitness. So that's actually kind of related to her dissertation, where she developed a point manual. That's what she calls it. So she developed a manual that explains how to apply all of these different behavioral interventions and procedures to dancing, if it was implemented by a dance teacher. But then from there, she kind of generalized it to any athletic trainer or coach. And so then it's applicable to many more sports. So it's been cool to see how that point program has really developed into this sort of introductory training for people who are just jumping into the health, sports, and fitness in ABA. And then from there, they usually get involved in some sort of supervision and they just take off. It's incredible.
That's awesome. And so does I can sort of see the BCBA side of things. Does because I know Wes talked a lot about that with Team ABA, that they would have supervision and sort of continuing education and whatnot available for the BCBAs. How do sort of regular old sports coaches take to this? Like what's I guess number one, kind of why would they come to you in the first place? Like what gets them to you in the first place? Because I wouldn't think that sports coaches would even be aware of sort of some of this stuff. I know there are coaching programs, and I believe you can be like certified as a coach in some way. I am not an athlete by any means. I don't do sports. I don't do dance. I'm got kind of 2 left feet. I'll ride my bike and go for a run every now and then, but that's about it. And do some yoga. But beyond that, I don't really understand the whole athletic system. So what would make someone who's a sports coach come to you, and what do they? How do they find it? What's sort of the feedback?
Yeah, so Mallory started off working with dance teachers, and she herself is a dancer and dance teacher. So I think initially it started off with a lot of her contacts in the Tampa Bay area. And so that personal connection really allowed her to sort of sell her idea to them. And from there, I think it's been a lot of networking. And as ABA has disseminated generally, also ABA in health, sports, and fitness has slowly started disseminating as well. But that buy-in component is tough. You definitely have to be confident and really sell your product and sell your services. So that way, if you can prove that it's effective and it's efficient, then people are willing to put the time and money into, finding out more. I think the data and the results really do speak for themselves. We get a lot of feedback. Oh my goodness, like I can't believe how this works so well. Like I can't believe that this student who's been struggling on one aspect of this athletic movement for so many years is now doing it correctly. So once they do get their foot in the door and have sort of a taste of how quickly and effective like this whole behavioral procedure is in improving sports performance, I mean, the buy-in is there. So it's really cool to see how quickly people come back and how long they stay with us too.
That is cool. We know ABA is, data-based. Do you find so do these sort of non-ABA folk, when they leave you, are they collecting data? Are they recording data? Do they do all that sort of piece as well? And are they into it? Like, because I imagine a lot of that would be new to them.
Yes, for those who are interested, they're super into it. For some who have some hesitations about graphing, it can be tough. We do encourage in our trainings that you have to use the data to make decisions. That's how you're going to know if it's working or not. So I think that when we're training, we sort of drill in that point about, you really should be graphing. You really need to be collecting the data on it, and that's where you're going to see the results. And so then once they do start that, they're like, oh yes, I can see that this data point has gone up just one percentage point, but that's showing me that the student is learning. So I think that it's something new for them, but we can get them there. We do provide like graphing tutorials and training during our sort of point seminar. So that helps getting them used to seeing the graphs and used to putting data in. And then we're of course there at any time to help assist if there are any questions.
Right on. And are you getting coaches, are you getting folks that are sort of primarily sort of yoga and dance teachers? Or are you getting coaches from a lot of different sports?
So many different sports. It's so incredible to see when we have a point program with quite a few participants, how diverse the backgrounds are. We do, of course, have BCBAs and BCABAs who are interested in entering health, sports, and fitness. But then we also have people who have no experience in ABA. They're a personal trainer, or they're a basketball coach, or a swimming coach. I'm just thinking back to some of the people that I've interacted with. And they, just found out about this training and they're like, oh, this seems cool. And they join and they love it. We've even had like nutritionists and health coaches. So it's interesting to see how we have to apply all of our examples to different backgrounds. Sometimes we have to get pretty creative.
Absolutely. When we kind of talked before, and something that also that drew me to you as sort of, maybe slightly different from some of the other folks that I've looked into in the kind of health, sports and fitness kind of area, is that you're also doing this work with folks with disabilities. So it's not just coaching for sort of typical folks in typical sports, but you're also applying some of this stuff to folks with disabilities. What's that look like? Because I know, generally speaking, and maybe this is just my sort of non-athletic bias here, but generally speaking, certainly at least school age kids, a lot of autistic kids in particular, tend to not do so well in phys ed courses or team sports or those sorts of things because of not always because of anything because of them, but because of the context and the systems are not all that inclusive. And so, things just don't work well. And if they are inclusive, they're inclusive in the sense of, the kid becomes, the equipment manager or the water boy or, the ball grabber in tennis or something instead of actually participating in this, or the mascot, which is, sometimes, frustrating from sort of a stigma perspective. But, don't get me wrong, I'm sure there's folks that love being the mascot. And I think I've seen a few that do. So what kind of work are you doing with folks with disabilities to kind of get them more into physical activity?
Yeah, so kind of have the clinical side of that and then the research side of that. So
Perfect.
Clinically, we do have private sessions. Generally, we have private sessions where we work one-on-one with a client with a disability. And so we develop a plan specific to that individual. So depending on what their goals are for whether they're there for fitness, yoga, dance, we try to, make that plan according to their interests. And so we select different target skills that we're going to work on. We select different antecedent and reinforcement strategies that we might include. And then really we just go along with this sort of fitness session or this dance class, but we're using ABA throughout that. We may even incorporate their behavior intervention plan that they have from their primary BCBA. We'll include that in our programming that we do at the studio. So we really try to draw from all of these different areas. So from their primary BCBA, from what the parent is reporting, and try to create a session that's most suited for that individual and their interests. With the research side of things, I'm working with, mainly now I'm going into the area of increasing physical activity for individuals with intellectual disabilities. And so kind of moving away from the sports side of things and going more into the physical activity. And so with that, we're generally the research in physical activity looks at increasing steps or increasing like daily steps or something like that. We all hear of the 10,000 steps a day recommendation, or we have our tracker, our Fitbit trackers that kind of track that for us. So that's one of the main areas of research right now in physical activity. But I'm actually trying to look at a different area of physical activity. So the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services recommends that we do engage in physical activity, moderate to vigorous physical activity, or MVPA. And so some of that, or the majority of that actually, should be focused on aerobic activities in which we are increasing our heart rate, getting that cardiovascular fitness, and really getting the heart pumping. But also another aspect is the muscle and bone strengthening activities. So those are things like lifting weights or jumping, things that help promote our strength. And so those activities are not typically targeted in research. And so I haven't found much research, maybe a few articles here and there, looking at promoting those types of strengthening activities. And especially very few articles trying to promote those activities in individuals with intellectual disabilities. So that's sort of where I'm going now with my research in physical activity, is trying to get them to increase their number of reps on these certain activities and exercises.
Well, that's really cool.
Yeah.
And needed. So I mean, I do, when I was doing kind of more clinical work, I was working mostly with adults with intellectual disabilities, often kind of more on the profound end of the spectrum, and you know, and often in kind of group home, kind of day program context, and you know, often physical activity, physical fitness, and nutrition, and those sorts of things were top of mind, not necessarily for the individual, but because of. So in at least in our province, we have something called licensing for residences and whatnot, and it sort of comes out of, I think it comes more out of kind of like the sort of nursing home regulations and those sorts of things, or in hospitals and whatnot, but they're also applied to group homes that have, I think, residents that are, I think, 3 or more residents in one house. And you know, if any of the provincial folks are listening right now, I apologize, but I find it to be very institutional because the regulations are so detailed. I know they're meant to keep folks safe and whatnot, and healthy and those sorts of things, but they also keep things really and actually literally sanitized. So you know, things like you know, bleaching the counters every day, and you know, so you're almost walking into a building that smells like a hospital in a lot of ways. And in addition to that, there's a lot of control, and I hope it's changed, but this is going back into sort of kind of like the early to mid sort of 2000s, where both diet and exercise were not really a choice; they were prescribed, and we had nutritionists and dietitians that designed the menus, and they had to you know very food group specific, and it didn't really matter what they liked eating. It was more about ensuring it. You can tell there's a bit of a soapbox frustration here for me, because we were essentially forcing these individuals to be super healthy, you know, from a sort of a dietary and research-based sort of angle. So, you know, they needed to be a certain weight, they needed to have a certain amount of food, and so on. You know, and in hindsight, you know, I think that really probably created some body image problems, issues, and self-esteem issues. But at the same time, it also created a ton of challenging behavior. You know, because this is my home. You're going to make me do this stuff? No, I'm not going to do it, and I'm going to engage those behaviors that will allow me to escape from those activities. And so it ended up really being that most of the exercise was walks. Lots of long walks. And staff enjoyed these because it allowed them to sort of, walk ahead of the individual, be on their phones, some of them smoke a cigarette in the back, or whatever, to sort of, it was almost like a break for them, and they just let the individual walk for hours and hours and hours, which of course, was frustrating for them on a few levels. One, because there was never a destination. We're never walking to do something. It was just walking for the sake of walking. I don't know two people that just walk for like 2 hours straight or longer. Usually you have a plan where you're going to go and do something and that sort of thing. And so, but what I've also found is when we've tried to sort of introduce, activities, like we'll give them a basketball or whatever, they throw them the basketball, they catch it and they drop it and they just kind of move on because they don't really know what they're supposed to be doing with that basketball. And then staff just kind of quickly kind of give up on sort of introducing new activities. So I'm curious, I don't really know where I'm going here. I'm curious what kind of thoughts on physical activity for folks that, growing up never really were exposed to these sports or exposed to these activities. So there really isn't a lot of motivation. And then, in fact, around muscle strengthening, interestingly enough, there was often an attitude for a long time, and again, very institutional, that we shouldn't help these folks get stronger because then their challenging behaviors will become more severe. If we actually put someone in boxing, isn't that maybe a bad idea, was sort of the thought. And I actually had a client in boxing who was doing boxing, and everyone thought that was a bad idea because he was engaged in aggressive, challenging behavior, and thought, okay, now he's going to actually have technique to go with his, aggressive, challenging behavior. So there seems to just be a lot of stigmatic kind of barriers to sort of getting folks involved in these sorts of things. So I'm curious, I guess, one, have you kind of run into that, like as far as, maybe a belief that individuals who are, in the more kind of severe end of intellectual disabilities or any level of intellectual disabilities can't and don't want to do exercise, and B, that there just isn't any variety to it. How have you kind of dealt with all of that? Or is that just an experience that I've had that's not common across the board?
Yeah, I think that I think it's possible, like you've experienced it, and it's possible that it's happening in other contexts and other environments as well. I would definitely say that in the studio we try to vary the types of activities that we're doing. Even if a client is coming for a fitness like workout session, we still may incorporate music and have them sort of doing their exercises to music, or we may incorporate some yoga into their stretching at the end of the session. So I think providing a variety of options there is really important, so that way they can have choices. And so based off of their choices, we can ask them, oh, do you want to do yoga for more time, or do you want to move to the next activity? And then we can also gauge, like, what is their interest? What are they interested in? With the aspect of, maybe handing someone a basketball and they don't know what to do with it, there is a teaching aspect too. Every time we say, oh, you need to, do a bicep curl. Well, yeah, I can hand my client the weights, but they may not know what to do with it. So there's the teaching aspect as well. So the difference between the can't do and won't do. Can't do, you need to teach them how to do the skill. Won't do is a motivational issue. So we need to, figure out how we can motivate them to engage in that behavior. So kind of two aspects to that. And so there are different ways that you can target that. But I think most importantly is to remember to go along with the client's interests, because it is their recreational time. So that's an important consideration.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I think we're sort of, and this is an issue I think we run into with in these settings, is that we sort of assume that if they don't know how to do it, then they don't want to do it, and so as soon as Billy drops the ball. Okay, he's not into basketball. Let's never try basketball again. Let's try something else. Oh, we gave him a volleyball. Same thing. He dropped it. He's not into volleyball. Let's drop it. But these folks have never had the opportunity to be sort of introduced to sort of some of these things. I'm curious how, like, weightlifting isn't motivating for typical folks. I mean, unless you have really set goals and like, so for example, in my younger days, I enjoyed cycling a lot, and so I wanted to have stronger legs so that I could pedal faster, and so I went to the gym and worked out primarily my legs, so that in the end I could be a better cyclist. Through the process, I enjoyed it. It was, it became, I got immersed in the activity. I had, multiple reps, as it were, of exposure to it, and I enjoyed it. And I enjoyed going with a buddy and, having a spotter and so on and so forth. But how do you motivate someone to want to do muscle strengthening?
Yeah, we have to get pretty creative, because sometimes there's not that interest in actually engaging in the exercise, the exercise itself. Doing a bicep curl, that's not fun. I don't want to do that.
No.
So we try to make other aspects really fun, really exciting. Our environment that we bring them into in the studio is has lots of lights and colors. They're able to change those different lights, so that way it's like their environment that they get to enjoy. And then we provide access to reinforcers based off of, completing a certain amount of exercises and things like that. So we are able to get them motivated to work for other reinforcers. But I also think that we have some amazing therapists who work with us, and once you get to know the client, it's just the smallest things, like counting in a silly way, like raising your voice in like a high pitch and making it really fun and exciting for them. Even just counting was so exciting for one of my clients, and the therapist was counting the number of knee touches they were doing, and so that they were so excited to listen to her count in this funny way. So, oh my gosh, the creativity that's needed it's crazy. So we try to get really creative and find different ways to motivate our clients to do exercises when maybe they're not so interested in the exercise, but they're willing to work for something else. It can get pretty fun.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah, that sounds fun. And I think maybe that's where certainly I was lacking, in the sense that, as the group home manager, having no interest in sports or dance or anything like that, is probably harder for me to sort of motivate my staff to sort of do the same, and sort of bring some of their sort of skills and and creativity into the game. So I mean, I think that speaks to that. We talked about research. So so what research are you doing? And I think you've published a couple articles as well. So maybe you could talk a little bit about the research you have done and will be doing. If you're planning on collecting continuing education credits for this episode, you'll need to enter the 3 secret words at www.cbiconsultants.com/shop. The first secret word is dance.
Yes. So the kind of main publication that I have is from my thesis when I was in the master's program, where I was working with typically developing dancers. So in that, we were comparing 2 different feedback styles, or feedback interventions: verbal feedback, where you're just providing, your verbal feedback. You're just telling the dancer the things that they did correctly and the things that they need to improve on. Versus video feedback, where I would record the dancer performing the skill and then show that video back to them. And as we're going through the video, I'm pausing. I'm saying, okay, see here, your leg was at 45 degrees. We need to raise that to 90 degrees. Or here, your arm was in second position right next to your ears. That looks wonderful. So giving them specific feedback, going frame by frame through the skill. So the difference between those 2 feedback styles or feedback interventions. And so I conducted that study with 3 participants. And interestingly, we actually found that there were mixed results. I hypothesized that video feedback would be better because it just seems
for sure.
way more specific and way more involved and more intense of a procedure, and you're really getting into the fine details of the movement. But when it came to the results, for one participant, verbal feedback was more effective. For one participant, video feedback was more effective. And for the third participant, both were sort of equally effective. And so we weren't able to make, big conclusions from that, except for that it may be, according to that individual athlete, different feedback styles may work differently. One thing to note is that we weren't able to complete the study in the sense that we weren't able to run out the intervention sessions for too long because the pandemic hit at that time. So we had to stop data collection, but there was enough data collection to at least, make some general conclusions about the mixed findings. But from that, we sort of looked into what was going on during the feedback session. So during the feedback session, I would have them perform the skill and I would provide feedback, whether it was verbal or video feedback. And so we sort of did an analysis of the feedback. And so we are looking at sort of the quality and quantity of the feedback. How complete is my feedback? Am I giving feedback on all 30 steps of the TA, or is it only part of the TA? And then also, is my feedback accurate? So is it high quality feedback? Am I telling them, oh, you did a good job on step X when your leg was in the air at this angle? Or was that completely false? Did I, make a mistake as a trainer? So looking at the completeness and the accuracy of the feedback and how that related to the results of the study. So that's what I'm currently working on. And so we're in the process of analyzing the data and trying to see exactly what was happening and did that influence the results. And I think it's really important to look at that because that's what we're trying to figure out is like, what makes feedback work? Like, is it the quantity? Is it the quality? Is it some combination of that? And it would almost be cool to see, how much feedback is needed and how accurate does it need to be to still see some sort of result.
Totally.
It would just be an interesting study. I don't know.
No, I think it's super interesting, and I'm really glad because that was going to be my next question. Is sort of, I'm really glad you're looking at sort of that quality quantity piece, those other kind of metrics because you're right. Feedback is given in so many different ways by so many different people. We know there's some good research on sort of from sort of the OBM literature on providing positive feedback at certain times and corrective feedback at other times and what that and different ways that can be presented. And I'm sure there's research on this, but I've only done sort of introductory OBM stuff. What does kind of the research say, sort of maybe outside of dance, but just in general on feedback? Is there sort of any consensus to sort of quality and quantity and sort of how to give feedback?
Yeah, I think generally, they say the more specific feedback is preferred. It's
specific, right.
It's preferred that you're giving that praise in exactly what the supervisee, the client, the athlete, whoever it is that is receiving the feedback, you are targeting exactly what they did correctly and exactly what needs to be improved. But I think that like you said, it's just so there's no systematic way for delivering feedback yet, or there's not really any sort of agreement on how to deliver feedback, how much feedback to deliver. So I think there's still room for looking into that and figuring out exactly how much and how well the feedback needs to be delivered, especially in the context of health, sports, and fitness, but specifically the sports aspect where you're trying to improve performance.
Yeah, I mean, it's really like a dosage question, right? And I think about. I also think about sort of individual preference in there too, and because there's sort of, I know there's public feedback, there's private feedback, there's, like you said, video and verbal. There's also graphical feedback, so showing them a graph of their performance. And then there's also, what is it? I forget what the term is, where essentially they'd look at a video and give themselves feedback.
Like a self-evaluation.
Yeah, self-evaluation feedback. And I know that can be really, really powerful, and also take a load off the giver of feedback because they don't have to say anything. That's right. That is a good catch. Good job. Yeah. So that's how you can improve that. So are you? So what are those aspects that you're analyzing? Like, I mean, are you just looking at amount? Well, first off, how are you defining quality and quantity? Quantity seems pretty more obvious, but quality I'm curious about.
Yeah. So, I guess each of the movements that I had the dancers perform, there was a task analysis associated with each one. So it's 25 to 30 steps detailing exactly what they need to be doing at a specific time in the movement. And so my feedback should be aligned exactly with that TA. That TA is like the golden thing, the target skill. That's the definition. So my feedback should be exactly like that. And let's say for quantity, if it's a 30-step TA, I should have 30 steps of feedback. But realistically, when you're actually doing an intervention, I had clients who were 6, 9, and 12 years old. They cannot digest 30 steps worth of feedback. That's not possible for them to, take that feedback, figure out things that they did right and the things that they did wrong, all before you have to do the next trial.
That's a lot of videos to watch. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's just too much feedback in a way. I had anecdotally, like when I was doing my thesis, I noticed that, after I was giving about 1 minute of feedback, one of my participants started walking away from me and was kind of like, just doing their own thing. I was like, oh, I'm not done yet. And kind of had to bring them back over for the sake of the study. But in my mind, I was like, well, that's interesting. If you're working with young athletes, they may not have the attention span to listen to that much feedback for 30 steps. So just like an interesting thing to add in there. But then looking at the accuracy, because I have a TA and I recorded everything in my thesis. So because I recorded them, I was able to actually score how they did during the training session and then compare if I provided a praise statement when they did the step correctly, or if I provided a praise statement when they did the step incorrectly, or was I providing corrective feedback when they did the step correctly, or corrective feedback when they did the step incorrectly. So I was able to kind of see the correspondence between how they performed and what type of feedback I was giving them, whether it was praise or corrective feedback. And so if they matched, I was like, okay, I did a good job with accuracy. And if they didn't match, I was like, okay, accuracy wasn't great on this step. And so then I was able to sort of collect all that information for all 30 steps for that one trial, that one movement. And I did that across all of the training trials for all of the participants, all of their skills. So a lot of data that I have to process. But it was a very interesting analysis of feedback. And I think that's one part that really needs to be looked into. So that way we know how to most efficiently and effectively provide feedback to athletes.
And so outside of sort of the research, when you're kind of working in the clinical setting, are you, and again, this is, I'm just sort of trying to apply some of the basic stuff I've learned in OBM. I took Shannon Biaggi's online intro to OBM course. It's really cool. Like $100 for like 15 credit hours and just a really good sort of overall understanding of the concepts of OBM. And she talks about trying to figure out what kind of feedback folks prefer. So do you do any of that when you're doing your actual like sort of clinical stuff with folks? Because there's some people that just hate verbal feedback in general, and certainly they hate it in public. But I think I imagine most of the feedback that you folks are doing are probably one-on-one, especially with the folks with disabilities. But do you look at that piece?
Yeah, I think that we do look at that when it comes to training some of the competitive dancers. Some prefer the verbal feedback. Some prefer the graphical feedback, which is really cool.
Yeah.
Some prefer to have it written. So we do try to work with them on what they prefer, how they prefer to receive their feedback. Yeah. I think it's interesting with the ones who prefer the graphs. It's so cool because we explain the elements of the graph. Okay, this is what we're seeing on the x-axis. This is what's on the y-axis. Here are your data. This is where we were in baseline. This is where we were after we, started working with you or, implementing a certain procedure. You want to see the data go up. And that's such a, basic and simple way to describe it to like a 9 or 10-year-old. But yeah, they see the data go up and they get so excited about that. And
that's
so
cool.
They really like to see the graphs. And I thought that was so interesting that they would even be interested in looking at a graph at their age.
I mean, it kind of makes sense. I mean, I know that's something, again, that again, coming out of the OBM stuff, that as we're trying to sort of work with sort of, group home staff who generally don't have much ABA training, and we're trying to sort of, get them to sort of, do basic activities. So essentially, for the PBS or folks out there, kind of tier 1 stuff, like just being nice and offering choices and offering activities and having a schedule and sort of, basic sorts of things in place. And I had Denny Reed on recently, and he talked a lot. I think he talked a lot about sort of graphic displays being super reinforcing for folks to kind of see that, and that folks that have no interest in making a graph or any idea of how to design a graph, they see a graph and they're super motivated by it. It's not just we behavior analysts that love looking at graphs. It seems to be everybody else. But it's super cool to hear the little kids are looking at graphs and going, "This is awesome."
Yeah, it was really cool. And I think one piece that you mentioned earlier is that some people may not want to see their graphs or their feedback on public display. And Dr. Quinn did a study where she did public posting of graphical feedback.
Cool.
So she did have the participants' graphs in the lobby of the studio. She would post it with their name because it was okay within the studio to have their name and their graphs next to each other. And so then, depending on if they met that, whatever their mastery criteria was, or their criteria for improvement, whatever their goal was for that session, she would place a gold star next to those students. And so they really enjoyed having this sort of ceremony where their dance teacher would show the graph to everyone that was there in the studio that day and give them praise on the things that they were improving on, maybe provide some feedback. And they were dancers from different levels, but they still enjoyed having people pay attention to them and pay attention to their improvements and everything. And so they reported in the social validity as well that they enjoyed the public aspect of public posting. So you never know, maybe someone is interested in doing public posting, even if they think they're not.
Yeah, it's surprising, but then I guess it's not but that little ones would be so reinforced by objective data, we often talk about how objective feedback is the best to give because it takes away the personalization and the emotion out of it. But to know that just even young ones are appreciating that, I mean, who knows? It could even be a nice sort of segue into introducing young folks to the field. You want to make these yourself? Here's what you can do. That's really cool. I'm wondering about I want to talk a little bit about sort of this the point program and sort of just behavioral coaching in general. So the point program is essentially a behavioral coaching program, right? So first off, I hadn't really heard of it, and I kind of did a little Googling, and I discovered that I didn't realize how far back the research on behavioral coaching goes, and that there are some really I've only read the titles, but look like some really cool studies on behavioral coaching go back to the early 80s with a fella that some folks will be familiar with and probably didn't know continue to do research with that fella that wrote the very first ever published behavior analytic article. The psychiatric nurse as an engineer. I believe that's the article, like 1958 or something like that. And that's Ted Allion, if I'm pronouncing his last name right. But he's got a whole slew in the 80s of research on behavioral coaching. I had no idea. So first off, what is behavioral coaching? It seems like it's just what it is. It's coaching using maybe behavior science, but we don't want to use the name of it in the definition. So what is behavioral coaching exactly?
Yeah, I think it's feels simple to me, I think, because I've done it so much, but it really is the application of, behavioral practices and behavioral strategies into coaching these athletes. So simple use of, antecedent strategies and reinforcement contingencies to help improve and enhance sports performance. And then I think that in the point program, we try to incorporate specific behavioral procedures like the tag teach and the public posting and video modeling, video feedback. These are all parts of that point program that Mallory developed when she was doing her dissertation. And so those are all, those 4 interventions are the behavioral procedures that we specifically teach, so that way they can improve performance and enhance performance. But then we have general behavioral coaching strategies, and then we have those specific procedures as well. So both can kind of go hand in hand to improve performance.
I wonder, for the listeners and for me, again, who not knowing much about coaching in general, I wonder if maybe you could kind of come up with sort of it doesn't have to be a real example, but and absolutely, if you want to use dance as the medium, but sort of just kind of try to briefly sort of compare what sort of typical coaching might look like for let's just say for a particular skill, like if it was basketball, for shooting a basket, if it was for dancing, it's doing a dance. Sorry, I apologize. Versus behavioral coaching, like what makes them different?
Right. Okay, that's a good question. I think that leads me more in a direction. I think traditional, I'll speak more towards dance because that's my experience, but traditional dance instruction does involve a lot of coercive teaching methods where you may see that they're kind of pointing out more criticisms rather than providing praise. They may be using some punishment contingencies that they don't even realize that they're using, but they're using them. And I think even praise can be very general. Just to bring up one of the studies that Mallory did, she actually did a descriptive analysis where she observed dance teachers teaching with their traditional teaching methods and took partial interval data on their feedback and instructions and whatever they're saying to their students. And she categorized that feedback according to specific verbal feedback, general verbal feedback, and then specific praise, general praise, and then also like yelling and all other different categories as well. And she found that with the traditional teaching, oftentimes you might get a very specific criticism or correction, but then you're getting very general praise. So it may be something like, oh, you didn't do that right, like your foot wasn't pointed, but then the praise side of it is good. So it's very general. And so I think when we're looking at behavioral coaching, we are looking at task analyzing a skill and trying to get into the very specific aspects that are done correctly and incorrectly to provide feedback. And we're taking out the critical aspect of it and just providing praise, but then providing the corrective feedback in a way that isn't critical, but still helps the dancer or athlete improve.
Yeah. The coercive piece is not surprising and but still wild to kind of say out loud, that because we've tried to move away from coercion in our field, and I think we still have some struggles there that we're working on, but the coercion was certainly, something I think that was used more earlier in the game in our field. But to see that, that in 2020, that's still kind of the norm for a lot of different kind of coaching, and I don't think it's just dance. I think of certainly I think a lot of sports, football and others. I think there's a lot of yelling, for sure. I'm in music. I think I brought this up in our pre-chat. There's that movie. I think it's called Whiplash, and a kid is sort of like a prodigy drummer that goes to Berkeley and his drumming teacher. He's what's the guy's name? The actor. Oh, I can't remember now, but he plays J. Jonah Jameson in Spider-Man, but I can't remember his name. Bald guy. Anyway, he does. It's super coercive. He's just screaming at the guy, making him play till his hands are literally bleeding, and then demeaning and you see this. I think you see this kind of in acting too sometimes, and and the theory is, I'm trying to build, resilience in you and strength and I just know you're awesome, so I'm trying to push you harder, because somehow pushing harder seems to be the best practice in a lot of coaching, and yet none of this stuff is research based, right? Like there's no research on. Is there research on in general on kind of sports coaching outside of sort of behavior coaching?
I haven't looked into the research outside of dance, to be honest, but
But just even with dance, so is there research outside of behavioral coaching on dance?
Yeah.
Coaching.
So I looked into some of the research on like the coercive methods and sort of why dance education hasn't evolved to be, I guess, less coercive and moving away from the use of those practices. And it's interesting to see that, there is some relation between the use of coercive practices and chronic injuries in dancers, which was so interesting. And I think what you were saying about, the drummer and he's getting hurt in the process of practicing, but he has to keep going, and that could lead to a chronic injury. And then thus the dancer can't dance in the future. They can't compete at that competition, or they can't perform in that recital. And so the coercive practices just push the dancers to a point where they may not be able to perform and seriously injure themselves. Or it can cause severe anxiety and stage fright, which is not great when you're in a performing art, or when you're performing for a sport, you have one shot to perform. And so if you have stage fright or anxiety that's been built up because of these coercive practices, well, then we're not doing our job as a trainer or as a coach or a dance instructor.
Yeah, and it's just really become sort of the culture of a lot of these activities of coercion. It takes me back to now this dates me a bit, but I don't know if you remember the show and it would have been, I'm guessing you're quite a bit younger than me, but the the show that might have been reruns was called Fame. You ever heard of that show? It was back in the 80s. There was a show called Fame, and it was about a school of the arts in I think it was in New York, and it was basically all of these sort of prodigies in dance and music and whatnot that would go to this school of the arts, and it starred an actress named Debbie Allen, who's still around, and I believe she's actually a dancer and a choreographer herself, and maybe an instructor. And the theme, I don't know why this still sticks in my head, because I must have been probably 7 years old when this was playing on the TV. But Debbie Allen would say at the beginning of every episode, it was sort of part of the, it was part of they had the theme song, and then it'd have Debbie Allen sort of yelling out this, "You want fame? Well, fame costs, and right here's where you start paying." And it was it was really just emphasizing that coercion, early on. And it's just become that culture forever. And this is a huge show back in the day. And so the world believes that coercion is the only way towards sort of success in these, whether it be in these sort of physical activity kind of sports. It's like, so you're fighting against a culture in a way with the research. What's that like? And how do you sort of tackle some of those barriers? The second secret word is coaching.
Yeah, I think just to touch on what you were saying, it's interesting that these coercive methods are being perpetuated by the same people who experienced it. So dancers are often the ones who become dance teachers,
right? And
they use the same coercive methods that they were once taught with. And even though they didn't like it when they were dance students, they still use that when they become dance instructors. And when, they're asked about why do you still use these methods, they say, well, it's, to make them become a better dancer. Like I went through it, like it made me a better dancer. And so it just stays, that culture of using coercive practices just stays. And I just thought it was so interesting that a dance student turned dance teacher is still using those same methods. And so how do we kind of combat that? So I think in the research side of things, we're working, or I think we could work towards seeing how we can show the research that's being like coach or instructor implemented research. So rather than having a researcher or a research team come in and implement an intervention to improve sports performance, why don't we teach the teacher to do it?
Right.
And
cool.
that will show them that, like, it'll demonstrate to them that, hey, if I use this procedure, I'm going to see the results, because generally we see that behavioral interventions work, behavioral coaching works. So, if they participate in the study, they will see that demonstration happen in front of their eyes, and they'll know that, I learned this procedure, I implemented it, and now it's working. So I think that from the research side, if we can recruit teachers, instructors, coaches, if we can use them to implement these procedures, that will start getting us the buy-in that will then translate into the clinical or sort of real life side of sports.
Yeah, because we're really talking about like almost like another form of sort of intergenerational trauma in a way, this passing down of awfulness from sort of one group to the other, and it makes me think of some of that, and I'm going to butcher some of this, but it makes me think of some of that research, like from like Dr. Glenn, Sigrid Glenn, on kind of the interlocking contingencies, and really basically she does a lot of research on sort of how cultures form, through these sort of individual contingencies sort of analyses, but then they sort of interlock with each other and sort of build this, and I'm butchering it, but look up some of Dr. Glenn's work. I do have an episode on this. I think it's Val Saney who talks a bit about this, so check that out. But Yeah, no, I mean, there. You could really dive deep into that. So, how? Just maybe more anecdotally, because you're working in a company that's training coaches and teaching coaches. Some of these folks are probably coaches that have used some of those more coercive practices, or certainly been exposed to them at some point. What's the feedback from those folks? Do you have some good stories of sort of like, essentially wake up calls of I don't have to scream at someone anymore, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I absolutely, yes. When they see that these behavioral procedures work, I mean, I feel like it's less effort to implement some of the procedures or just provide specific feedback, specific praise and specific corrective feedback. Just that process of providing verbal feedback in a more specific manner, such a easy, low response effort way of doing a behavioral coaching procedure. I think even that just shows them that, oh, I can get results and I don't have to yell at someone, or I don't have to get on the megaphone and scream to the whole team. I can still get results. I think I was actually listening to one of Mallory's podcasts, and she was saying that one of the dance teachers that she had worked with a long time ago would provide feedback. I say provide feedback, but they would throw a shoe at some of the students. And oh my goodness, like that's not what we want to do. And so then once they learned some of the behavioral procedures and practices, they're like, wow, well, yeah, less effort to do this than to throw the shoe, right? So I think that once they get contact with this procedure, result ends up with this result, improvements in my students' performance, they enjoy it, the coaches enjoy it, the parents enjoy it. I think that they get the buy-in. They come back and they want to learn more.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to talk about just two other kind of components. One, I was just wondering a little bit about the tag teaching side of things. So I know essentially what it is. So like teaching with acoustical guidance, and so the idea, as I understand it, is that it can work well for folks that. And please add to this, but I know it can work well for folks that maybe don't do well with verbal praise because, instead the praise is just, it's a click of some sort or a sound that sort of, indicates they've done well on a step, and then they kind of move forward. But you also mentioned sort of the importance of descriptive praise versus sort of general praise. So, I really liked how you did that step, correctly or whatever, versus good. But to me, and again, not knowing much about this, just saying good sort of seems similar to just clicking. So how does tag teaching fit into all this? Because it seems like it's a different kind of method altogether.
Yes, yeah. I think you got the basics down of tag teach. One thing that I will say is that tag teach is used for very, very specific aspects of the skill. So if we have a 30-step task analysis, you are tagging or you are clicking for one step, not for the completion of the whole skill. So if I didn't,
you're not going like this.
No.
While they're dancing, yeah.
It's having them perform the skill, but you're clicking for only one aspect of the skill. Maybe it's that their toes are pointed. So okay, I want this time when you do it, have your toes pointed. I'm going to click. If you hear the click, that means you did something correctly. That means that your toes were pointed correctly.
Yeah.
If you don't hear a click, you should try again.
Right.
And so you're clicking for very specific aspects rather than, just saying good or one click overall for the whole skill won't give you enough information. Yeah. So it's almost used as a way to give very specific praise. Yeah.
Gotcha. So that's an important clarification, because I was sort of imagining someone with a clicker through the whole dance is going away. Good job, good job, good job, good job, good job, and kind of blowing their mind. And so it's almost like well, it's like you said, it's really a specific kind of pinpointed piece of the training. So you might not tag teach the whole dance routine. You would just sort of tag teach that particular area that they might be struggling with or whatever. Is there a reason why folks use the tag teaching? Versus just sticking with the sort of the praise pieces? Is it just because it can be so specific and so sort of precise is the term, I guess?
Yeah, I think one aspect is that it's very precise. I think too, the kids, the athletes, they love it. It's something so different. They've never, had someone clicking for them. That's such a different thing. Yeah, we hear all the time, oh, you did this right. Oh, you pointed your toes correctly. You put your arm in the correct position. But I've never had someone come out and bring a clicker and tell me that or indicate that to me using the clicker. So the kids, the athletes, they love it. They think it's so interesting and so fun. And it's used as a very short, quick intervention. I think in Mallory's study that she published on this, it was a 12-minute session. It's super fast, really, really fast. You're just, you're tagging, you're going through the task analysis and you're just tagging the different steps in that. So I think it can be really useful, especially if you're looking to correct a specific movement. If you see that a athlete's, really struggling with one specific step multiple times, okay, let me work on tagging that one specific step.
Gotcha.
And maybe, targeting that with the clicker and providing that very specific praise because it's the clicker sound. That's the praise. Maybe that will help them, improve their performance. But then, if not, then sometimes you have to use EST or some direct instruction to help teach the skill as well. So.
The third secret word is feedback. How does, and again, I know very little about tag teaching too. So how does, I get the click if they do it right. So they do it wrong, then there's no click. So then what happens? So
they're told to try again. So basically you just keep trying again until you hear the click.
Right. And because it's just a small movement, it's not like you have to wait a while to tell them to stop.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
And so then after a few tries, if they haven't heard the click and they're still attempting after maybe 3 or 4 times, then you may pause. Okay, let me provide some direct instruction on how to perform this tag point correctly.
Gotcha.
Okay, now let's try it again with the clicker.
Gotcha. We've talked a lot about sort of, the kind of the consequence side of things, the feedback, the positive, the negative, the tag teaching, those sorts of things. But you mentioned a few times that, there's also, some really good antecedent kind of strategies and interventions. Can you give us some examples of what those might look like? What kind of things can you do for, and again, sticking on sort of the dance sort of theme, what might be some antecedent strategies you might put into place?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest ones is video modeling, which is commonly used in dance, but also other sports as well. You can have a video model that, an expert does, or maybe you have like a Olympic level performer, if you're looking at an Olympic sport. So you have a video of them performing whatever target skill, and you show that to the athlete before they perform the skill. And so it provides them with a visual of, how the skill is supposed to be performed. And then you might even add in some additional like instructions or, pointing out important components of the skill to help them. So that's one of the main antecedent strategies. I think that along with just some basic instructions in modeling, but video modeling I think is cool because you can get like an expert level performer on your phone or on your laptop and you're like, look, this is the top-notch best model for this skill. Like this is an Olympic level athlete. So yeah, do what they do.
Exactly. And now what about for some of the programs for the folks with intellectual disabilities? Same thing, video modeling, or are there some other things you're doing too?
Yeah, interestingly, we can still use video modeling for different, like if they're doing a yoga pose, we might show them a video of, that pose, or I've used it for teaching them different exercises. I'll use a video model. But then also providing some visuals, some expectations, just some basic things to help the session flow. And to manage expectations.
Really cool. The one thing I wanted to go back to kind of before we wrap up, and that's when you first kind of started, we're talking about sort of the research and clinical and how you're focusing on muscle strengthening, which again makes a lot of sense, and reps and so on and so forth, and also sort of the importance of aerobic exercise. But you said that a lot of the research tends to be more around steps. And the old Fitbit and the 10,000 steps or whatever, which I've never been able to grasp, how it makes sense. I do have, I think it's actually right here sitting in a pile. I do have a really old sort of version of a Fitbit that I've worn every now and then. It's super pixelated. It's definitely the early version. And
the newer version.
Yeah, and I wore it at the end of the day, and I wore it and then looked at the end of the day and it said, you did like 7,000 steps, but I didn't actually do anything. Like this was just me around the house, walking up the stairs, going to the fridge, taking the garbage out, taking the dog for a walk. Maybe there's something real in there.
More activity than most.
Yeah, for sure. And then it says, oh, you've done like 8,000 steps. And I'm like, I'm not far from this 10,000 number that everybody talks about. But in my mind, I didn't actually get any exercise. I got movement, right. And I think movement is something. Why is there such a focus on steps? And is there any real kind of, and I know you're not a medical professional or a physiotherapist or anything, but but from what you've learned, is there any value in walking 10,000 steps a day that that is measurable beyond the watch saying 10,000 on it?
Yeah, I think the aspect that you said about movement, movement is great. I think it's better than us sitting and not moving. So movement is great. But I think that it is important to note that, it's recommended that we do 150 minutes of moderate to vigorous physical activity per week.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And so that moderate to vigorous physical activity, that requires your heart rate to be, I think it's like 65% to like 93% of your maximum heart rate. So you need to be at least briskly walking, speed walking, or running or engaging in exercise. And so, maybe rather than 10,000 steps per day, you need about 20 to 25 minutes of moderate to vigorous physical activity per day. Mm-hmm. And so I think that aspect is the important one, that you're actually getting your heart rate to a certain level that allows for the health benefits to really have an impact. If you're doing 20 to 25 minutes of MVPA a day, that's going to give you more health benefits than walking at a very leisurely pace of, doing 10,000 steps a day. Those are very different things. But maybe, if you are walking, maybe you're more likely to pick up the pace a little bit and get yourself into that MVPA area. But just 10,000 steps a day, although has some benefit than, sitting around all day. I think it's important to get into that MVPA category and make sure your heart is pumping.
Yeah, because it seems really more like it's like steps is just, someone's, Fitbit's doing a really good job at marketing. They've convinced the world that you need steps and you got to count them by having our device. Whereas maybe if the sort of metric was changed a bit. Maybe it was 10,000 steps per hour. That would probably have to be vigorous because it'd be pretty hard to walk 10,000 steps in an hour. And so maybe those kind of measures might be more helpful. But yeah, I'm with you. Yeah, because it just seemed pointless to me. It seemed like if I took the watch off, I'm still doing my 8,000 steps by going to the fridge and going to bed and mowing the lawn, And so, but I don't feel like I've improved my health in any manner beyond, like you said, avoiding deep vein thrombosis by keeping my legs moving,
Absolutely. And I think, the Fitbits are a way to measure your activity. You're doing your activity regardless of if you're, measuring it or not. But the newer Fitbits and some of the other newer products out there do measure like your active minutes. Yep. So your heart rate does have to be at a certain level for it to start counting those minutes. And I found that to be useful for me to know, how many of my minutes when I'm exercising is my heart rate elevated to a certain level that it's going into a different category of minutes. And so then you can kind of count your active minutes to see if you're getting to 150 by the end of the week. So I think some of the technology is catching up to that idea of like, okay, well, yeah, we're measuring the steps, but also let's like measure the MVPA or active minutes side of things too.
Mm-hmm. And just one more time, MVPA stands for what?
Moderate to vigorous physical activity.
Moderate to physical. Gotcha. Really cool. Well, I love seeing the science applied to things outside of the usual autism kind of intervention or skills teaching for folks with barriers and whatnot. I love seeing it applied to sort of different areas, and I think it's a great way to kind of get our stuff disseminated. Have you just thinking about dissemination? I know you're early on, and you're going to be you're doing your dissertation now and analyzing the data, and we'll probably try to publish that one. Have you or others? And it's okay if you don't know the answer to this, but tried to publish any of this stuff in journals sort of outside of ABA to sort of get that exposure more?
I haven't tried with my research, but I know Dr. Quinn has tried with some of her dance research to explore some of the dance journals, especially because it's so important to help that field move away from the use of coercive practices. So if 100%. We can give them a replacement and give them some behavioral procedures that may be effective, I think that would be really cool to see that published in other journals. So that would be a goal. That would be really awesome to see that being disseminated in that way.
Totally. Really cool stuff. I'm really looking forward to kind of seeing, what the results are from your dissertation. How much longer do you think you have till you're wrapping this thing up?
I think about 1 more year if all goes well. So keep your fingers crossed for me.
Absolutely. You're just you're done the sort of work with the subjects now, so it's all just analysis and writing and defending now. Is that sort of where you're at?
No. So that project that I was talking about with the analysis, that is just a side project that I'm doing.
Oh, that's not even. Yeah. Oh, okay.
I'm about to start my journey with my dissertation, so haven't started yet.
And so, what's that going to be, and what's that going to look like, or do you even know, or is it too early to talk about that yet?
I feel like I just don't want to jinx myself, but I don't think that'll happen. But I am working to promote physical activity with children with intellectual disabilities, children and young adults, depending on my population pool that I have available to me. And so, we're looking at different reinforcement contingencies that may help promote physical activity. Like right now, I'm doing a small case study that may sort of inform my dissertation, looking at token reinforcement to increase that number of reps that I was talking about with some of the clients that have intellectual disabilities. And so we're just kind of just trying to apply these different reinforcement contingencies to see if they work, and can we kind of increase their number of reps in like changing criterion designs.
Right.
Can we apply it in multiple baseline designs? So just sort of doing some of the preliminary research on that, and just getting an idea of what the applications are so far, and then using some of that information to inform my dissertation.
Fantastic. Well, looking forward to that. Hopefully, maybe when you're done and published, we can and you're a doctor, we can bring you back on to talk about it some more.
That would be awesome. I'm looking forward to that.
So cool. Well, thanks so much for coming on. Great to have you.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great.
Cheers.